Hello, and welcome to another Warrior Creed live stream with me, the radical Majid Nawaz. And today's episode is about the what's known as the Middle East NATO, the new defense pact signed in Mecca, or the Mecca Agreement that is between Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. And they have signed a mutual defense pact, colloquially known as the Middle Eastern NATO, disparagingly known by Israel and some others as the Muslim NATO. But we're going to bring to you the details of this new and incredibly significant Middle East NATO or Mutual Defense Pact signed in Mecca. We're going to provide some analysis as to what exactly is going on, and the graphic that we're using for today, for today's Warrior Creed live stream, should be on your screens right about now. And there you can see a red triangle, deliberately selected by us, of course, reminiscent of the red triangle that was used by the Hamas terrorist organization in Gaza, supported as it was by Iran. So we have replicated or duplicated that red triangle upside down, but pointing in its 3 points towards Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. And of course, as you can see there, surrounding Iran in the middle. Now, the graphic that we've chosen for today's stream may give the impression that this new Middle Eastern Defense Pact is only about surrounding Iran. That is not the case. That is half the story. It is also about settling down and stabilizing the Middle East from the wars not only promoted and created by the Iranian theocracy, but also by the Likudnik Zionists who are currently running the country of Israel under the leadership of Netanyahu. Those two, the Likudnik Zionists under Netanyahu and the Iranian theocrats under the son of Khamenei, are the warmongers in the region, responsible for bringing conflict and war to the region. And that is, of course, the topic for today's stream. The Middle Eastern NATO, we are providing for you analysis signed as it was in Mecca by Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. Don't go anywhere. We're coming straight back after the opening credits to break this all down for you. And you're watching the Warrior Creed live stream with me, the radical Majid Nawaz.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
And to the Warrior Creed live stream. You should be able to see the title on your screens right about now. Middle East NATO, signed in Mecca by Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. As we introduced prior to the opening credits, we're going to break this down for you, go into exactly what it means. And of course, our regulars will be well aware that this was coming. We have been forecasting this on Radical Media for a long time. Once again, there is the graphic for you to see. And yes, of course, this graphic depicts Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia surrounding Iran in an upside down red triangle. That is an important and incredibly significant part of this analysis, but is only half the analysis. The other half we're going to go into as well is that this Middle Eastern Defense Pact is designed to put the region's security back into the hands of the Middle East, as opposed to being overly reliant on the American or generally Western protection, or indeed, of course, being overly reliant on Iran protecting, quote unquote, protecting the Middle East against what it posits as Israeli aggression. There are two factions warring it out in the Middle East and have been doing so for decades. They are, of course, the Israelis and the Iranians. And this analysis is going to demonstrate that finally we've reached a point in history where the Middle East has taken back its own security into its own hands to put an end to the ongoing perma-war situation promoted by those two factions, the Israelis and the Iranian theocracy, and instead seeking to stabilize the region under a mutual defense pact known as the Middle Eastern NATO. So that's the topic for the stream today. And again, You can see that graphic just there on your screens, and again pointing you to the title: Middle East and NATO signed in Mecca by Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. Let's begin by bringing you the breaking news. Many of you, of course, would have heard this news over the course as it broke over the course of this week. But let's summarize for you, just in case some of you are catching up, exactly what's happened. Well, as you see there, Reuters reports on the 7th of August, 2026, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Pakistan pledge mutual defense as Middle East turmoil escalates. And so that is the headline describing what's happened. We'll just read a bit for you from Reuters. Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey signed a joint defense agreement in Mecca on Friday, wedding Sunni Muslim US allies, alarmed at a regional conflagration that has brought Iranian missile fire onto Gulf oil exporters. That sentence in bold that we just read for you from Reuters, the key thing there and important to remember is the fact that these three countries, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, are overwhelmingly Sunni Muslim majority, not Shia Muslim, but Sunni Muslim majority. We're going to come back to the significance of that in just a moment. To carry on reading from this Reuters article, Iran and its allies have been firing on Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states and blockading their energy shipments since the US and Israel attacked it on February the 28th, in a major escalation after years of regional tumult. Turkey has NATO's second largest military. This sentence, folks, pay attention to. Our regulars, of course, will recall the formatting of the following sentence we're about to read you. It's something we have repeated over and over again here on Radical Media. Well, it's now finally something that is becoming common parlance, and we're going to read it for you. Pay attention to this. Turkey has NATO's second largest military. Saudi Arabia is home to Islam's holiest sites and one of the world's top oil exporters, while Pakistan is the only nuclear-armed Muslim country. Now, that equation describing the significance of these three countries that have entered into this mutual defense pact, we have repeated here on Radical Media often. The reason this is incredibly significant, beyond the fact that this is clearly a defense pact formed by the Middle East, in the Middle East, and for the Middle East, but in addition to the fact that this is Middle Eastern, these three countries in particular are hugely strategically significant. Turkey has a NATO standard military. Now, think about the countries that are members of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and you'll see the point, because all the other countries who are members of NATO are European and, of course, American. The purpose of NATO originally was designed to protect Europe against Soviet aggression during the days of the Soviet Union. It was an American-founded military alliance, hence the name North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and its purpose is to get European militaries cooperating with one another under the auspices of the American leadership, and for a long time until Trump, largely American funding. Of course, Trump is asking Europeans to contribute their own way, but the American leadership and European militaries included at the time Turkey as a member. And so as a result, Turkey has, its military has, let's say, for want of a better phrase, Western standard military training. And that is incredibly significant. Not only does it have Western standard military training, but in addition has NATO's second largest military. And by being a member of NATO, any attack on Turkey due to Article 5 in NATO is an attack, so long as that treaty survives, is an attack on all other NATO members, including the United States, as well as, of course, the United Kingdom, my country. Now, with that in mind, Turkey is now a new member of a new military alliance with its own version of Article 5, which is this new Middle Eastern NATO. And so this Middle Eastern NATO is almost due to the membership and its founding status of Turkey, is as a result on level with, in terms of its diplomatic might, on level with NATO security guarantees, because Turkey is a founding member. Insofar as NATO survives, any attack on the Middle East and NATO, and therefore any attack on Turkey being a founding member of the triumvirate in the Middle East and NATO, would, due to Article 5, automatically, if Turkey were to trigger Article 5, become an attack on NATO itself. That is the significance there, right there, of Turkey being a founding member of this Middle Eastern NATO. And that is, it drags NATO into protecting the Middle Eastern NATO due to Turkey's membership. Keep that in mind when you, from now on, read people talking about the destruction of NATO and wanting to end it. Do ponder what their real agenda is if they're pushing for that. Of course, there are many things to criticize about NATO, but keep it in mind, because it's just worth considering that some countries, not all of them, of course, NATO members were not paying their way, and President Trump is correct in that regard, but some countries may have an alternative motive for undermining NATO, and that's because NATO, of course, now, due to Turkey's Middle Eastern NATO initiative, provides a security umbrella to stabilizing the Middle East via Turkey and its founding membership in the Middle Eastern NATO. It is strategically, geostrategically, incredibly significant. So that's the first member they dealt with, that's Turkey. Let's do with the second there, Saudi Arabia. As this Reuters article suggests, Saudi Arabia is home to Islam's holiest sites, but that isn't really doing justice to the sentence. In the entire Muslim majority world, there isn't a country comparable to Saudi Arabia due to the fact that it is home to Islam's holiest sites, the two of them, Mecca, towards which Muslims pray. The direction of Mecca, of course, Muslims don't pray to anything, praying to God alone, but the direction Muslims face while praying is towards Mecca, because that's where the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace, was born. And then, of course, the second holy city is Medina, and that is the city that provided sanctuary to the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace, once he moved from Mecca, and then he returned from Medina when Islam spread back to Mecca and managed to unify the two. But those two holy cities are in Saudi Arabia. The diplomatic and therefore strategic importance that Saudi Arabia provides, by sheer fact that the King of Saudi Arabia also holds the title of custodian of the two holy mosques, cannot be understated. The leadership in the Islamic world provided by Saudi Arabia, for good or for bad. Of course, there was a time before Mohammed bin Salman, the current crown prince, when Saudi Arabia was exporting fundamentalism across the world, largely with the backing of the United States of America, to check the Soviet Union in Afghanistan against the so-called Afghan jihad, because the Russians had invaded Afghanistan. Of course, they recruited the Pakistanis back then to help them. But one of the things that they did, the Saudis, with US backing and with Pakistani support, was export a fundamentalist version of Islam known as Wahhabism in order to check, quote unquote, godless communism in Afghanistan. And that's why fundamentalism began spreading across the world. It was through the petrodollar. Now, that's all come to an end under the leadership of the current Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. In fact, Saudi Arabia is rapidly modernizing. But those two examples, the previous exporting of fundamentalism and its current modernization, all do point to the sheer strategic and diplomatic weight of Saudi Arabia vis-a-vis the Islamic world. If Saudi Arabia sneezes, the Islamic world catches a cold. It cannot be overstated. And that is the significance of Saudi Arabia in this Middle Eastern NATO. And then the final country there, Pakistan. Now, Pakistan, as is written there in the Reuters piece, is the Muslim world's only nuclear armed country. Now, that is incredibly important, not least because the two warring factions in the Middle East are warring primarily over their nuclear ambitions. And that goes without saying. Iran, Israel and America are seeking to prevent the Iranian theocracy from acquiring nuclear weapons. And of course, the Iranian theocracy's objection is that Israel, which it does, possesses undeclared nuclear weapons. And that is also true. So the fact that Pakistan is a party, a founding party before even Turkey was, as we're going to come to the Middle Eastern NATO, means that Pakistan can potentially provide its nuclear security umbrella to the Middle East, providing, of course, in doing so, it allows for stability to be brought to the Middle East, because there is no greater stabilizing force, counterintuitively, than possessing nuclear weapons. That in military doctrine is known as MAD. Again, counterintuitive because it's quite sane if you think about it. MAD stands for mutually assured destruction. The sanity there is no nuclear armed country will attack another nuclear armed country from fear of mutually assured destruction. And that's why nuclear armed countries do not go to war with each other. If they do, they are merely skirmishes. They do not go to total war with each other because total war would lead to mutually assured destruction. And so, as the doctrine holds, any country with nuclear weapons ends up becoming a force for stability vis-a-vis other countries with nuclear weapons. And that doctrine has held surprisingly well since the end of World War II and is pretty much has stood the test of time. So Pakistan joining this or being a first two founding members of this Middle Eastern NATO, along with Saudi Arabia, potentially provides its nuclear security umbrella to the region and prevents a total war breaking out in the Middle East because, of course, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons and therefore cannot stand up to a nuclear power. And Israel has undeclared nuclear weapons, but a nuclear power cannot go to war against another nuclear power from fear of becoming mad or mutually assured destruction. So Pakistan's inclusion in this Middle Eastern NATO is no less than a stroke of genius. It stabilizes the Middle East. And of course, you can see where this is going. There are two countries that object to all of this. One of them is Israel, wanting regional hegemony, as the Likudnik Zionists do. And the other is the Iranian theocracy, also wanting regional hegemony, as the Shia Islamists do. So these two countries, as we're going to go into over the course of this stream with receipts, object to this Middle Eastern NATO. But for everybody else, this is undoubtedly great news. It's very good news. It stabilizes the Middle East. Has the potential for permanently ending the danger of World War III breaking out in the Middle East. And of course, a stabilized Middle East will be a great force of will be a great economic powerhouse for the region. And this brings me to a last point, which we should have mentioned when discussing Saudi Arabia. It's not just the strategic and diplomatic might it carries from being the founding birthplace of Islam, but also let's not forget the petrodollar itself, which we just mentioned. Saudi Arabia is incredibly rich as a state and therefore is able to provide funding to countries such as Pakistan, which, though militarily strong, aren't economically as strong. So it's a very clever move, and it's a move that the rest of the world should receive as good news. You can see our reaction there now on your screens. As soon as this news broke, we said this is significant. And the Clash Report online says, watch, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan sign Mecca trilateral defense agreement. We're just going to show you this signing ceremony. Of course, keep in mind that it's just the shutters and the clickers you're going to hear are the shutters of cameras. There's no audio in this video other than the sound of cameras taking photographs. But it is important to see this historic moment. It is going to be a moment that history will remember well. And this is the signing, the live at the time it was being recorded, the signing by Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan of what's come to be known as Middle Eastern NATO, or the Mecca Agreement.
Answer.
And you can see there the point's been made. That was the signing ceremony, looking very formal, but it is incredibly significant and strategic news. The development, of course, was commented on by Trump, who has strategically been behind this as well. And so you can see here on a commentary account of Donald Trump's Truth Social on Twitter, because, of course, Truth Social is a different social media. Update, it says, on Donald J. Trump posts Truth Social. So this is Donald Trump posting on Truth Social, but being cross-posted onto Twitter by this commentary account. Update, 3 major regional powers are set to join a defense pact that could reshape the security landscape of the region. That's an understatement. It's not that it could, it will. It actively is going to reshape the security landscape of the region. To carry on reading from Trump's Truth Social, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan signed a bilateral defense pact in September 2025, agreeing that an attack on either country would be treated as an attack on both. Now, Turkey is set to join the agreement, bringing the military strength of NATO's second largest armed forces and a robust domestic defense industry. Saudi Arabia brings financial power and strategic geography as one of the world's biggest defense spenders. Pakistan brings a capability neither of the two other possesses: nuclear weapons. So Donald Trump now is also commenting from that same perspective on the value of each of these 3 countries: Saudi Arabia's diplomatic and financial weight, Pakistan's nuclear weapons, and of course Turkey's membership of NATO. Our regulars on Radical Media would have heard that commentary here many months ago. In fact, when Pakistan originally signed on with Saudi Arabia, this was the angle we were bringing. The reason it's so significant is because of what each country brings to the table, that the warmongering factions, the Iranian theocracy and the Israelis under the Likudnik Zionists, are unable to match. It is really a hugely significant and strategic diplomatic move. Alongside that Truth Social post, Donald Trump's Truth Social posted this video, which we're just going to play for you. It's a basic explainer, which will help people understand and get their heads around exactly what's going on. So take a look at this.
Are expected to sign a joint defense pact that could reshape the region's security map. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, together for the first time. Here's what each brings to the table. This builds on the Saudi-Pakistan Defense Pact signed in September 2025, which said an attack on either country would be treated as an attack on both. The new agreement expands that foundation to include Turkey. Turkey brings military muscle, NATO's second largest military, a serious domestic defense industry, and NATO-adjacent training and technology standards. Saudi Arabia brings money and geography. It is one of the world's largest defense spenders, sits at the center of the Gulf, and is hosting the talks, positioning itself as the anchor. Pakistan brings what the others do not: nuclear weapons. It is the only declared nuclear power in the Islamic world, and its army chief is in Saudi Arabia for the talks, showing how seriously Islamabad views this. Reports say the pact covers joint exercises, defense technology sharing, defense industry cooperation, and intelligence sharing. But the exact legal obligations are not public, so how binding it is remains unclear. The timing matters. The ongoing US-Iran war, rising Houthi attacks, Turkey and Pakistan's mediator roles, and Israel's expected unease. So what matters most? Nuclear deterrence, money and geography, or hardware and training? Let us know and follow for the next update.
So that was posted alongside Trump's Truth Social post, cross-posted to Twitter. It's a brief explainer, but of course, we've also just gone into that, so we won't repeat it. But here for you by a Turkish social media user, translated into English, is a summary of the Mecca agreement. Again, just demonstrating how significant this is. I'm going to read the summary for you. 170 nuclear warheads, of course, that's in Pakistan. G20 membership, that's Saudi Arabia and Turkey. OPEC leadership, that's Saudi Arabia, that's the Organization of Oil Producing Countries. NATO membership and one of NATO's largest armies, that's Turkey. Total economic size of $3 trillion, three of them put together. 1,000 fighter jets, again, with 3 of them put together. A total of 2 million personnel in the armies, when you combine all 3 of them as well. 7,000 tanks, 90,000 armored vehicles, when you combine all three of them, and 34 submarines when you put Pakistani and Turkish submarines together. 500 combat and naval platforms with the three of them together, total surface area of 4 million square kilometers, and soon F-35 for Saudi Arabia and Turkey. So again, when you hear this, it is an incredibly significant development. And what we mentioned at the top of the show about the fact that this has its own mutual defense, its own version of Article 5. The Turkish foreign minister has recently confirmed that. So as reported by Clash Report, he was asked, is there a principle in the Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan defense agreement similar to NATO's Article 5? Turkish foreign minister Hakan Fidan said, technically, it's the same. That's why you establish a security pact. We're going to play this for you on your screens. But it is in Turkish. But don't worry, the Radical Dispatch that we publish tomorrow will also include the translations. But just for completeness, it's a 45-second clip. We thought we'd play you the Turkish anyway of the foreign minister in Turkey saying that this mutual defense pact is equivalent to NATO and has its own Article 5, meaning if one of these three countries, Turkey, Pakistan, or Saudi Arabia, is attacked, all three must join in solidarity in their mutual defense. Take a listen to this.
Yavaş arkadaşlarımla, editör arkadaşlarımla birlikte girmek istiyorum. Öncelikle şu NATO'nun 5. maddesine benzediği ifade edilen 3 ülkeden birisine herhangi bir saldırı durumunda bu bütün pakta yapılmış bir saldırı addedilecektir ilkesi. Bu NATO'nun 5. maddesiyle aynı mı? Burada yaklaşımımız nedir?
Burada yani teknik olarak aynı. Teknik olarak aynı. Zaten onun için bir güvenlik paktı kuruyorsunuz. Onun için nihai derecede bir ittifaka katılma kararı alıyor diğer ülkeler. Yani birbirinin koruyucu desteğinden faydalanmak için. Burada bir sıkıntı yok.
Bir yükümlülük yavaş arkadaşlar.
And we'll just read the translation for what you just heard there as well in Turkish. The journalist asked the Turkish foreign minister, that's translations on your screens now. I would like to delve into this gradually with my colleagues and fellow editors. First, let's look at the principle, often likened to NATO's Article 5, whereby an attack on any one of these three countries is deemed an attack on the entire pact. Is this identical to NATO's Article 5? What is our perspective on this? And then Hakan Fidan says, Turkish foreign minister, he says, technically speaking, it is the same. It is technically the same. After all, that is the very reason for establishing a security pact. That is why the other countries ultimately decide to join the alliance, to benefit from mutual protective support. There is no issue there. So they are pretty much confirming now that this is a equivalent to NATO, has its own equivalent Article 5. And of course, this is something that leaves, as we've said earlier, it leaves the warmongering factions in the region. That's both the Iranian theocracy as well as the Likud Zionists. It leaves them isolated in the region, and it leaves their plans for perma-war in somewhat of disarray. Now, on that point, we're going to play you this and then break down each country and its perspective, meaning how the Iranians look at this and how the Israelis have looked at this, how they both reacted, and then conclude for you. But let's first of all go back to what we said on GB News America back in March on the ongoing conflict as it was, forecasting this moment would come. Let's blow that up on your screens for you just as a quick refresher so you can take a listen to how we got here, and then we'll go break down the Iranian reaction and the Israeli reaction to this new Middle Eastern NATO. So this video from GB News America with Bev Turner should be enlarged on your screens now, and we're just going to play it for you.
First of all, it's a great moment. It's a historic moment. And before we count our chickens before they hatch, it's important to say that though, of course, the world is anticipating the signing of the peace deal on Friday, there are some strings left undone. There is, of course, the reaction of many voices inside Israel that are voices, even interestingly, on the left that are anti-Trump, that find themselves curiously on the same side of Israel, being skeptical of this deal, even though they are ostensibly anti-said. We are cautiously optimistic about over the course of this week with the signing ceremony in Geneva on Friday. Of course, President Trump is already there. And this is truly a historic moment. It is something that is it changes the equation in the Middle East. The deal will mean at the end of the root cause of what has been a decades-long conflict in the Middle East. And there were really two main parties that were behind that decades-long conflict. Multiple countries, by the way, involved in that war over decades. And those two main warring factions were, of course, Iran and all of their proxies that they were backing across the region, and on the other side, Israel. Now, what President Trump has really achieved here is truly groundbreaking. No US, even the Obama deal, that President Trump undid famously. The difference this time is that President Trump, right up until the last moment, was working hand in glove, it appeared to be, with the Israelis and taking them all the way up to this line where this peace deal has been signed. Now the Israelis have, many voices, in fact, inside Israel, have complained about the deal. But the difference this time around is there really isn't much room left for them try and make the same Lebanon, where Netanyahu's made some noises about not being happy about having to pull his troops out. The difference this time around is that if Israel were to continue this war, they would really find themselves internationally isolated, and perhaps for the first time without even US backing beyond this point as well. And now if we look to Iran, again, this war has demonstrated, what with the complete decapitation of the Iranian leadership, that Iran, after doing everything it could in the region, including bombing its neighbors, found itself also Gulf states, of course backed by Pakistan, stood on the one end opposed to Iran's continued bombardment of its neighbors. So both countries found themselves moment that despite the fact that there is clear to carry this on, there isn't much political room for anyone to maneuver beyond this point. So what we're hoping to see is a peace deal that, despite difficulties, is held and maintained, and it could truly mean the end of a decades-long conflict in the Middle East, and perhaps the beginnings of an era of peace. Of course, with that said, we've still got the Gaza situation and the Gaza peace board to get to as well, but one thing at a time there.
Now, what you just heard there was the breakdown as to how Iran and Israel, both countries involved in decades-long conflicts in the Middle East, are isolated due to President Trump's peace initiatives in the Middle East. Now, this Middle Eastern NATO is part and parcel of those peace initiatives, because the purpose of this Middle Eastern NATO, not including Iran and Israel as it does, is to bring the heavyweight countries of the region, Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, which is describe why they're heavyweight countries at the top of this stream, is to bring them into the theater of war as guarantors for the stability, in other words, the peace that President Trump is so keen to secure during his presidency. Let's not forget that the peace talks between Iran and Pakistan that we were just referencing in that clip from last time on GB News America with Bev Turner were hosted by Pakistan. So if Pakistan is hosting those peace talks between the Americans and the Iranian theocracy, while at the same time entering into a mutual defense pact with Turkey and Saudi Arabia, you can see where this is going. Those three countries in this Middle Eastern NATO are taking it upon themselves to ensure peace and prosperity for the Middle East. This is why it's an incredibly strategic development, and it's why the warmongering factions in both Iran and Israel stand to lose if they oppose this direction. They will only end up being isolated. And exactly how this brings us to breaking it down for you. Let's go first of all to the Iranian reaction. And Iran stands to be surrounded. The Iranian theocracy, we've called this section, the Iranian theocracy is surrounded, and you can see why. There again on your screens is the graphic we're using for today's stream. It's the map of the Middle East, and it should be very clear by now that this Middle Eastern NATO mutual defense pact between Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey completely surrounds Iran. You can see Iran there in the middle of an upside down triangle, with Pakistan to its right, Saudi Arabia underneath it, and Turkey above it to its left. Iran sitting firmly in the middle of those three countries, surrounded by them. And also, crucially, there are two straits here that we're going to draw your attention to. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is underneath Saudi Arabia, and that strait is the one that basically governs the shipping lines going into the Suez Canal up the coast of Africa. So if you look to the bottom of Saudi Arabia and you see that body of water, where it pinches closest between Yemen and Eritrea and Ethiopia, on the African side, that is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Now, if you go to the top body of water, where you see Iran and you see Oman, that tiny bit of water where it pinches closest is known as now infamously known as the Strait of Hormuz. So there are two incredibly strategic waterways with international rights for trade and shipping. And also keep in mind that the oil produced by Saudi Arabia needs those straits to leave and go to international waters. If you go to Saudi Arabia from the top there, it's oil pipelines that go to the body of water sitting above it, underneath Iran and above Saudi Arabia, that top body of water. For any oil to exit from Saudi Arabia, it needs to be able to go through that Strait of Hormuz, passing by Iran and Oman, which are the closest two countries on the coast there to the Strait of Hormuz. And if Saudi Arabia were to take its oil to the bottom body of water, it needs to go past what is known as the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and that is where Yemen joins with Ethiopia and Eritrea on the African side. That's the second, or the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It is no coincidence that there is now war that is engulfing both of those strategic waterways. Of course, the war in Yemen is well known and funded as it is by the Iranian theocracy with the Houthi militia inside Yemen. And of course, at the top of the Strait of Hormuz, the war between America and Iran is also well known. But Iran is the country, the Iranian theocracy is the country that has attempted to close that top body of water, the Strait of Hormuz, and of course attempted to close the bottom one in Yemen, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, using the Houthis. And of course, on the African side of that coast, the UAE, allied as it is with Israel, is engaged in multiple conflicts in an attempt to control the African side of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And that's why you see the UAE, with the backing of Israel, funding militia across Sudan and all of these other countries in order to gain its own interests in controlling the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. So that's why this triangle is so important, because by surrounding Iran as this triangle does, the purpose is to bring a level of stability to that region and secure those trade routes, which are international trade routes. Of course, energy prices globally are affected by one's ability to trade in oil. Now, if you remember, when this war first broke out, as Radical Media reported on the 5th of March 2026, the title of the dispatch is on your screens now. Iran stood isolated because what Iran did is that in response to the attacks against it by the Americans and the Israelis, strangely for many, Iran decided to launch, totally unprovoked, attacks against its Sunni Muslim Arab neighbors. If you recall, Iran started lobbing missiles towards all of the Arabs that were surrounding it. And that's why in that Radical Dispatch from the 5th of March, we called it Iran replies to Israeli strikes by attacking Sunni Muslim Arabs and the UK. That was a huge miscalculation by the Iranian theocracy, and it led to their increasing isolation in the Sunni Muslim Arab world. Now, you wouldn't know this if you're reading Western and especially regressive left Western media. The impression you'd get is that the entire Muslim world is unified behind Iran, or the Iranian theocracy, and against Israel. That is patently not true. Yes, Muslims generally have a gripe, a bone to pick with Israel, but they similarly have a huge bone to pick with the Iranian theocracy. One only needs to look, for example, to Syria to understand some nuance in this situation. The Sunni Muslim Arab peoples of Syria, newly liberated as they are, were fighting a regime under Assad that was backed to the hilt and until the very end by not Israel. Of course, Israel had relations with Syria, but the military and financial backing and diplomatic backing for that regime, Assad's regime in Syria, that was, of course, responsible for the brutal civil war by cracking down, as it did, on peaceful protesters at the beginning of the Arab Spring. That regime was backed by none other than the Iranian theocracy. And if you go and ask any average Syrian what they think of the Iranian theocracy, they will probably reserve more anger for them than they will for the Israelis. If not equal anger, probably more, one would suspect, because of the sheer amount of suffering that the Iranian theocracy brought to the Syrian people by backing the tyrant Assad as they did in Syria. So the picture in the Middle East is a lot more complex than Western media lets on. And certainly Western regressive left media lets on. Sunni Muslim Arabs have an issue, have a bone to pick, yes, with Israel, but they also have a huge problem with the Iranian theocracy as well. And it's because of those strikes that the Iranian theocracy launched against its Sunni Muslim Arab neighbors after the US-led war was initiated against it, that the Iran now stands isolated in the region. You can see from that dispatch we've written there, the Sunni Muslim Arabs of the region who were attacked by Iran were unified in their condemnation, with Saudi Arabia declaring that it would militarily support the US war if necessary. That was the beginning of the Iranian isolation. And this is something we mentioned previously on the Warrior Creed live stream. We're just going to play this for you again by way of a reminder to demonstrate the increased isolation that the Iranian regime is facing. So take a listen to this. We've just blown it up on your screens for you so you can see it. We agree on the fact that the Likud Zionists and Israel currently under their leadership, led by Netanyahu, are ideologically driven for conflict. That part we agree on. Where we disagree, and where the Western aggressive left should frankly shut up, is that the Iranian theocracy is also ideologically driven for war in the region. They are an ideologically driven power, such as the Likud Zionists. Their ideology instead is Shiite Islamism, not Likud Zionism. And Shiite Islamism believes in the supremacy of all Islamism, that is to say, synchronizing law with any one given reading of Islam. That is Islamism per se. But it is on top of that sectarian because it's Shiite Islamism. So it believes in the supremacy of Shiites to govern any Islamist ideological entities that they go about creating in the region. And that's what they did in Syria. They were artificially propping up the Shiite Alawite dynasty in Syria in order to keep the Syrian Arab Sunni Muslim population under their grip. So Shiite Islamism isn't just ideologically driven for conflict and war, it is also sectarian on top of it. Now, that was a previous Warrior Creed live stream. You can see where we're going with this now. It's we'll provide all of this, don't worry, in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch, free for all subscribers. Go to Radical Media, majidnawaz.substack.com, which you can see there ticking along at the bottom, ticker there at the bottom of the screen, to subscribe to Radical Media, and you will get the free Radical Dispatch, the podcast version of this stream for premium subscribers and other paywalled content. But the basic newsletter will be free for everybody. So go there to sign up at majidnawaz.substack.com. But this video you just heard is from a past Radical Dispatch, and Warrior Creed live stream, of course, talking about how and why Iran finds itself now increasingly isolated in the Middle East. And this new Middle Eastern NATO, Sunni Muslim as it is, with Turkey being a huge Sunni Muslim majority country, Pakistan, of course, being Sunni Muslim majority, Saudi Arabia being a core, fundamentally crucial Sunni Muslim country. This new Middle Eastern NATO ends up isolating the Shia Islamist Iranian theocracy in the Middle East, and this brings us now to the reaction of the Iranians themselves. So Al Jazeera English reports, as you see on your screens now, that the Turks are keen to downplay that this is targeted specifically against the Iranian theocracy, and that is for understandable reasons. Let's just read it for you. Al Jazeera English reports, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has said that the defense pact he signed today with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, quote, does not target any country, and that's the end of quote, and welcomes other friendly nations seeking peace, prosperity, and stability in the region. So the Turks were trying to downplay it targets any country, whether Israel or Iran. The Turkish foreign minister continued, as reported by Arab News Online. He said the Saudi-Turkish-Pakistani Defense Pact is technically the same as NATO's Article 5. You just heard video of him saying that. There will be a committee of ministers as part of the pact, similar to NATO, as well as a general secretariat. In other words, this is going to be a proper body that they're going to be setting up with structure. It says, Iran is not a target of the Defense Pact. Nobody is a target. And this is the key line, which we will ask you to remember as we come back to it. It says, Iran is not a target of the Defense Pact. Nobody is a target as long as they don't attack member countries. That's the key line, which we're going to come back to in a moment. It says the Red Sea shipping safety concerns our interests, so Turkey must be involved in Saudi Arabia's international coalition. Egypt may join the Defense Pact once certain technical matters are sorted out. We'll come back to Egypt in a second as well. But the key thing there, if you remember, we said, remember that line, we commented there, quote, Iran is not a target of the Defense Pact. Nobody is a target as long as they don't attack member countries. And then our commentary, which is what Iran had been doing to Saudi after the US Israeli strikes. In international diplomacy, meaning is found not in what is openly said, rather what is implicitly implied. If you say no one's a target, no one country is a target of this mutual defense pact unless they attack one of us, and in particular Saudi Arabia, they're worried about, then of course, by making that caveat, you're pointing to the country that is currently actively attacking Saudi Arabia, and that is Iran. Iran is currently actively attacking Saudi Arabia. It is attempting to choke those shipping routes that sit both above and below Saudi Arabia so that the oil supplies cannot get out from Saudi Arabia, because by doing so, Iran is seeking to weaken the global economy, because by weakening the global economy, by pushing up energy prices, you're weakening America and Israel, because the global economy runs as it does on the petrodollar. That's Iran's strategy. It's why they're shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, and it's why they keep attacking Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is exporting the oil. And so this defense pact, the Turkish foreign minister saying, this isn't against any country, but if you attack one of us, we're coming for you. Iran is currently attacking Saudi Arabia, which is what makes it implicitly against the Iranian theocracy, even if they're saying it's not. And this video here that's on your screens now is an explainer, in particular, because you've heard a lot in mainstream media about the Strait of Hormuz. This one gives you a bit of more context to the second strait, which is at the bottom there. We mentioned the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. So we'll blow this up for you on your screens. This is a nice explainer talking about the strategic importance of this region. Again, just take a listen to this.
Saudi Arabia just assembled a multinational army, Turkey, Pakistan, Egypt, and 11 more, to fight for the Bab el-Mandeb, one of the most critical waterways on the planet. Here's why. The Strait of Hormuz had already been effectively shut down by the US-Iran war, forcing Saudi Arabia to reroute its oil exports through Red Sea ports instead. Then on July 20th, Yemen's Ansarullah, also known as the Houthi movement, announced a naval blockade against Saudi shipping in that same Red Sea, cutting off the one route Riyadh had left. Within days, a Saudi-linked tanker was hit. Brent crude surged past $100 a barrel, and Saudi Arabia struck back with airstrikes on Houthi infrastructure at Hodeidah. 10 days later, Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Defense unveiled something it hadn't built in years: a multinational maritime defense alliance, headquartered in Riyadh, tasked with protecting the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the Red Sea, and the Gulf of Aden. 43 nations showed up to the founding meeting. 14 signed on immediately, including Turkey, Egypt, Pakistan, Jordan, Qatar, Bahrain, and Nigeria. The coalition calls itself purely defensive, aimed at no single country. But look at who stayed away. The UAE and Oman, the two Gulf states that actually sit on Hormuz, didn't join, despite facing the same threat from Iran. And notice what this alliance doesn't cover. Hormuz itself stays outside its mandate. Saudi Arabia is now defending two choke points in two different wars, and the US hasn't joined this one yet, but everyone expects it will. Is this the start of a new Gulf military bloc, or just a stopgap? Drop your take in the comments and follow Map Narratives for the next update as this coalition takes shape.
And so there you have it. It is quite clear. Hopefully that little primer explains the significance of the two straits there, and of course the significance of the military alliances that are developing. It is all about international trade. And of course, international trade is nothing without international shipping routes. And it's those shipping routes over which these wars are currently being fought. And it's always the case with international relations. A lot of the behind the bluster and the propaganda and the noise, what it really comes down to in the end is strategic control over international trade for the purposes of, therefore, control over the international economy. And that is what's going on here with the straits of both Bab el-Mandeb and Hormuz. Now, again, Reuters, we're still on Iran. Reuters reported on the 10th of August that Iran says there's no reason to fear the Pakistani-Turkey-Saudi security pact. So despite what we've just explained in detail, they are actively attacking Saudi ships attempting to sail through any one of those straits. They're still downplaying the fact that the Saudis are slowly and surely building their own mutual defense alliances. The Iranians are attempting to downplay this because they're attempting not to raise the alarm in the hopes that they remain on the better side of this alliance, because the Iranians, of course, have bigger problems to worry about, and they are the US-Israeli strikes on the Iranian theocracy. So the Iranians find themselves caught between a rock and a hard place, and their reaction has been an attempt to downplay this mutual defense pact. So you can see here from Reuters, reported on the 10th of August, Iran says no reason to fear Pakistan, Turkey, Saudi security pact. We're just going to read a chunk of that for you from this paragraph that's on your screens now. It says, Iran sees no reason to be concerned that a new security pact between Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia is directed against Tehran. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghaei said on Monday. Baghaei said that the pact showed a shift in regional countries' approach to security, with greater reliance on their own capabilities rather than outside powers. So that is true. This does show a shift in Middle Eastern security, and it does show a greater reliance on their own capabilities. But that is at the expense of the Iranian theocracy, which up until this war had, via its proxies, been funding and arming militia all across the Middle East, and of course supporting the tyrant Assad in Syria. All of those countries, whether it's Syria or the Hezbollah terrorist organization funded by the Iranian theocracy in Lebanon, or even the Hamas terrorist organization funded by the Iranian theocracy in Gaza, or indeed the Houthis terrorist proxy militia funded by the Iranian theocracy in Yemen, or the Kataib Hezbollah terrorist proxy militia funded by the Iranian theocracy in Iraq. All of that was Iran's attempt at hegemony in the region and control of those two straits, the Bab el-Mandeb and the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranian theocracy has everything to lose from this Middle Eastern defense pact, even though it is attempting to downplay it. Here's Iran's foreign ministry spokesman, Ismail Baghaei, on the Mecca agreement, saying exactly what we've just read for you, attempting to downplay it. Again, we've just read the translation of it, so this video will be in Persian. Again, it's just 45 seconds or so, but you know what it means because we've just read it. We'll just read it for you again. It says, there is no reason why, as he mentioned, the two neighboring countries of Turkey and Pakistan, as well as Saudi Arabia, three countries with which we have deep religious, historical, and civilizational ties, should worry that this treaty will be against Iran. So here is the spokesperson of Iran from their foreign ministry trying to downplay this.
دو کشور همسایه ترکیه و پاکستان و همینطور عربستان، سه کشوری که ما باشون دارای پیوندهای عمیق دینی، تاریخی و تمدنی هستیم، نگران باشیم که این پیمان علیه ایران باشه. سابقه دوستی بین ملت‌های ترکیه و پاکستان به عنوان دو کشور همسایه مسلمان دیرپاست.
Now, of course,
پیوندهای دهنیده.
The Iranians have no choice but to downplay this development. Keep in mind the reality of it on the ground looks exactly like the map that we introduced this stream with, and that should pop back up on your screens momentarily. And that is that Iran, the Iranian theocracy, is absolutely surrounded in this way. So despite the fact that the Iranians are downplaying it, there really isn't much room for maneuver. The Iranians are downplaying it, and the reason they are is because, of course, part of Shia Islamist ideology is its false claim to leadership over the so-called Islamic Ummah. And so if Iran, if its theocracy were to try and posit itself as somehow overly offended by the prospect of Muslim unity, that fundamentally undermines the Shia Islamist ideology, which essentially argues for Muslim unity against Israel. Their entire brand and credibility and their attempts at legitimizing and ingratiating themselves with the wider Muslim world, the overwhelming majority of which is Sunni Muslim, is by appealing to Muslim unity, because of course the Shia are a minority sect within Islam, and the Shia Islamists, those who seek to impose Shia Islam over all of society using law, such as the Iranian theocracy, the Shia Islamists are an even smaller minority among the minority who are Shia. So the Iranian theocracy has long relied upon the messaging of Muslim unity or Islamic unity to try through which to gain its own credibility and legitimacy. So it's very difficult for the Iranian theocracy to overtly come out against something such as the Middle East and NATO, because it would undermine its entire messaging of the need for Muslim unity. So that's why they're downplaying the threat being posed to them, when clearly this is a threat to them. And here you can see an Iranian supporting website known to host extremists in Britain. It's called 5 Pillars. This website is the mouthpiece and platform for Islamists and other fundamentalists in the United Kingdom. They have published an article by the former leader of Hizb ut-Tahrir in Britain, Dr. Abdul Wahid. Hizb ut-Tahrir was proscribed in 2024 in Britain under the terrorism legislation. And so this organization is now proscribed under terror law. So its leader, who was the last leader up until its proscription, simply describes himself as a Muslim activist. He is clearly an Islamist. He used to be the leader of a now proscribed Islamist organization in the UK, my own former Islamist organization that I joined when I was 16 years old. So the reaction here is significant because this website is allied to Iran. And what they've decided to do is, instead of celebrating the one thing Islamists always harp on about, which is Muslim unity, it's very telling. They've instead decided to question this military alliance. And of course, the implication we're making is they are questioning it because it is not in the interests of the Iranian theocracy. And this website has many times been a supporter of the Iranian theocracy. So you can see the headline from 5 Pillars. A Muslim NATO, moves to unity are welcome, but let's be realistic. So you see that again, it's significant, the language being used. Muslim unity is good, but let's be cautious. They cannot overtly criticize unity. Their entire credibility rests on this idea, this Islamist idea of Islamic unity under one global caliphate. Really, Islamists are the globalists in the Muslim world. That's how you should understand them. Islamists are the globalists of the Muslim world. They believe in one world dictatorship. But of course, to achieve that, they use positive words such as unity, when really unity in politics is fascism, just like unity in religion is theocracy. That is really what it's about. True politics needs to be diverse, and true theology also needs to be diverse. Unity is in our altogether in our humanness. But we're going to read a section of that article from the pro-Islamist website, 5 Pillars, again, critical of this Middle Eastern NATO. The deep strategic ties, says Dr. Abdul Wahid, the leader of the now proscribed organization Hizb ut-Tahrir in Britain. It's an Islamist group. He says the deep strategic ties that all three signatories already maintain with Washington point strongly towards this being an arrangement Washington has sanctioned rather than one designed to displace it. Well, he is correct there. It's just that, of course, that's a good thing. He thinks it's a bad thing. To carry on reading, the Gulf states have watched repeatedly as the United States failed to deliver the protection it long promised. Protection against whom, do we wonder? Protection against the Iranian theocracy that's bombing the Sunni Muslim Arab states, which of course he's not mentioning here. To carry on reading, a pact like this can serve a useful function for Washington. It lets regional partners absorb more of the burden of their own defense without requiring America to withdraw the deeper structures of influence, bases, arms sales, intelligence sharing that keep it embedded in the region. Better America embed in the region than, say, I don't know, China or the Iranian theocracy. But no, these people only don't, their main gripe is America. It does make you wonder, doesn't it? To carry on, that raises the real question. Does this pact represent genuine appetite among these states for a security order fundamentally different from the status quo, or is it simply a more efficient way of managing that same status quo? So that's a paragraph from this article by the former leader of Hizb ut-Tahrir, a now proscribed Islamist organization in Britain, Dr. Abdul Wahid, on a website that has been overtly supported by and supports the Iranian theocracy. And so, yes, this move does leave the Islamists and the Iranian theocracy, Shia Islamists as they are, isolated in the region as a decidedly non-Islamist bloc of Sunni Muslims is managing to organize its own security and thereby circumvent the Shia Islamist Iranian theocracy's attempts at dominating the Middle East. So that deals with Iran. Now to point 3. Israel is also isolated from this development. Now, there's a well-established Israeli political blog known as Israel Hayom, and the best place to start is there because they are incredibly candid about their opposition to this Middle Eastern NATO. On the 8th of August, they've said in an article headlined Israel's answer to the Muslim NATO. The subheading is important to read there, even though it's a paragraph. It says the defense pact signed in Mecca by Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan is accelerating the regional arms race. It pushes normalization with Riyadh, it's the capital of Saudi Arabia, further out of reach and positions Ankara as a threat on par with Iran. Israel needs to respond along 2 parallel axes: its existing Mediterranean alliance with Greece and Cyprus, and a new counterpact with the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, and India. So this blog, a well-known and well-established political blog in Israel, Israel Hayom, is opposing the Middle Eastern NATO, and pejoratively, by the way, calling it a Muslim NATO in order to scare you all from this development, because, of course, Muslims are scary. It is opposing this completely and is saying it is not in the interest of Israel for this to occur. Of course it's not. It's not in the interest of any country that seeks war in the Middle East for this Middle Eastern NATO to develop. And that includes Iran and Israel. Now, we're just going to read a paragraph from this political blog for you. It says, Turkey, meanwhile, is emerging as a major threat to Israel, no less significant than Iran. Ankara will seek to use the alliance to expand its influence in the Gulf and challenge Israel both diplomatically and military. At the same time, the Ankara-Islamabad axis, Islamabad being the capital of Pakistan and Ankara being the capital of Turkey. At the same time, the Ankara-Islamabad axis is gaining momentum, with security, procurement, and industry at its core. Turkey is now Pakistan's second largest arms supplier, and the 2 countries are moving beyond off-the-shelf procurement toward deeper cooperation involving the joint development and production of technology from the ground up. So the other thing to keep in mind from the Israeli angle is not only are they opposed to this new Middle Eastern NATO, but they are isolating and singling out Turkey as their new Iran, as the new biggest danger to Israel in the Middle East. And that's because, of course, Turkey, being a member of NATO, provides that key linchpin that prevents Israel from directly attacking this new Middle Eastern NATO, because by doing so, if Israel were to attack it, like if Iran were to attack it, Turkey would trigger Article 5, and that brings all of NATO into the war. And of course, that leaves Israel incredibly isolated. So keep in mind, that's why Israel opposes this, because it isolates their warmongering completely, just like it isolates the Iranian theocracy's warmongering as well. And the Israeli Likudnik Zionists and those who support them are singling out Turkey as a new threat to them. Now, we reported all this, just as we did with Iran. We reported all this in the Radical Dispatch back in June. That dispatch, again, will publish it for you tomorrow on majidnawaz.substack.com. But you can see the headline there on your screens. Back on the 18th of June, Trump berates Israel and agrees peace with Iran. And section 4 in that dispatch was headed, Israel's opposition is most volatile. And we're going to read for you what we said there. Out of all the factions that oppose the deal, that is peace in the Middle East, Israel is the most dangerous and volatile. And then we published a Times article, which was published on the 16th of June, headlined, Trump says the Strait, which is the Hormuz Strait, is partially open as deal called a failure in Israel. So Israel called Trump's peace deal a failure. The subheading: the US president said at the G7 in France that the agreement with Iran was all signed, but uncertainty remains over key elements. And again, in that dispatch, we continued. In fact, Israel seems to be the most dangerous faction opposing Trump's deal, with a former prime minister even suggesting that he'd overturn it once he's back in power, as well as start a new war with Turkey. Social media commentator Sprinter said, Israeli opposition vows to restart war with Iran if elected. This is quoting Naftali Bennett in the video. We're about to show you this video. The countdown to regime change in Iran will begin once there is a change of government in Israel, former Israeli PM and opposition leader Naftali Bennett declared. Bennett and his political allies have repeatedly criticized Netanyahu for supposedly not being decisive enough in dealing with Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas. The former Israeli PM has also argued that Israel needs to adopt a more aggressive stance towards Turkey, whom he has deemed as the new Iran. So for all of the troubles Netanyahu is causing, he may well appears to be a relative moderate when compared to the opposition leaders inside Israel that are at his heels, riding his coattails, seeking to come to power. Here is the former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett telling us that he wants Turkey to be considered as the new Iran. In other words, Israel wants to prepare to go to war with Turkey as well. Take a listen to this. In fact, let's enlarge this on your screens so you can see it for yourselves, and then we'll press play.
New Turkish threat is emerging. I want to be very clear. Turkey and Qatar have gained influence in Syria, are seeking influence elsewhere and everywhere throughout the region. And from here, I warn, Turkey is the new Iran. Erdogan is sophisticated, dangerous, and he seeks to encircle Israel. And while some senior Israelis were on Qatar's payroll, Qatar and Turkey are nourishing the Islamic Brotherhood monster that is growing and eventually might become as dangerous as the one created by Iran. Turkey and Qatar are gaining influence not only in Syria, but also in Gaza, through the front door, and everywhere, and trying to create a new choke ring. Turkey is trying to flip Saudi Arabia against us and establish a hostile Sunni axis with nuclear Pakistan.
Now, of course, that's since been accomplished with this Middle Eastern NATO. That is, of course, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and nuclear Pakistan forming this mutual defense pact known as the Mecca Agreement. And you saw just there and heard the former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett running again to replace Netanyahu say Turkey is the new Iran. They are incredibly worried about this because it leaves Israel and its warmongering in the region isolated. Now, there is some truth in what you heard Naftali Bennett talk about. Of course, the Muslim Brotherhood and a politically Islamist organization is an issue because they also believe in Islamism. Islamism, as defined as the desire to impose any one reading of Islam over all of society, is essentially theocracy. And of course, theocracy is bad. So the key thing to remember is just like when the Iranian theocracy says some things that are true, such as, hey, we're only doing all of this because the Israelis are occupying this bit and this bit. You know, they're in the Golan Heights. They're killing Palestinians. So all of that plays on your emotions without really understanding that the Iranian theocracy itself is doing these things, as it did in Syria. And so they're looking to distract you by pointing to Israel while they're doing exactly the same themselves to Muslims in countries such as Syria. Likewise, the Israelis, the Likud Zionists under Netanyahu, but also, as you can see, Naftali Bennett is the same ilk. They do the same too. They will point you and manipulate your emotions to point you to stuff that is true. The Muslim Brotherhood is an issue. It is a problem. But that doesn't mean that just because they're a problem, that this Middle Eastern Defense Pact is a bad thing. It's a bad thing for Naftali Bennett because it will end up constraining and containing their own ambitions for perma-war and expansionism in the region. And that's why we put it to you that the Israelis are opposed to this and stand to become incredibly isolated by it. Now, Netanyahu has made this clear. You can see here by social media user Shadow of Ezra saying Benjamin Netanyahu is now making the case on Fox News for a future war with Turkey. We're just going to play this for you as well. They all, of course, they saw this coming. They saw this Middle East NATO coming, and they've been opposed to it because it will end up constraining and containing the Likudnik Zionists from Israel. They've been opposed to it right up until this week when it was signed. So let's blow this up on your screens. You can see here Netanyahu, like his opponent, Naftali Bennett, saying exactly the same thing, that Turkey is their biggest threat. And this does point to the fact that this is an Israeli problem, not just a Likudnik Zionist problem. Generally, public opinion in Israel needs to change and stop being for war in the region. Have a listen to Netanyahu.
Because we're on the verge of the president's going to Turkey, look, Turkey is a great country, but it's governed by a man who calls openly for the annihilation of Israel. He occupies half of Cyprus, a NATO country. He's threatening Greece, another NATO country. And he talks openly about conquering Jerusalem. His foreign minister, his number two, said that the Jewish state hasn't a place among humanity. Basically, it has to be wiped out. His interior minister, said he looks forward to be the governor of Jerusalem. Well, for a regime infected by the Muslim Brotherhood, an extreme movement that hates America and chants death to America from that side of the spectrum, I don't think they should be given F-35s or the engines for their fighter jets, because that'll upset the power balance in the Middle East, which is ultimately guaranteed by Israeli air superiority and also by, I think, by America's posture in the Middle East.
Now, again, keep in mind that there are half-truths always in these statements. The Muslim Brotherhood is an issue. Of course it is. And there's, very few voices outside of mine that have been as vocal in challenging all forms of Islamism everywhere in the world, not just in the West, and including the Muslim Brotherhood. But the idea that the Middle East is only stable because of Israeli air superiority when Israel is a party to the war is absurd. As is the idea that somehow the entire Turkish regime is infected by the Muslim Brotherhood, and further such statements you heard in that interview by Netanyahu. But the Israelis they seem almost united, and they are obviously, Israelis disagree vehemently with each other, but they seem, all of them, almost united in this idea that Turkey is the biggest threat. Netanyahu, there you heard just now, his main opponent, Naftali Bennett, seeking to unseat him because Netanyahu is apparently not hawkish enough, is also of the view that Turkey is the new problem. And here we're going to play for you the Israeli Diaspora Affairs Minister, Amichai Chikli, saying that the Meccan alliance is very dangerous and it's a very troubling development. Again, we'll just blow this up on your screens so you can see it and then press play. But again, it makes the point that just as the Iranian theocracy is not interested in peace in the region, nor are the Israelis and their leadership as they currently stand. Take a listen to this. This is the Israeli Diaspora Affairs Minister. He's a government minister opposing this defense pact signed in Mecca.
יש פה אירוע מסוכן מאוד ומטריד מאוד. סעודיה בעצם ישבה על הגדר, היה לה כבר הסכם הגנה קודם עם פקיסטן, אבל ברגע שהיא הולכת עם הטורקים שנמצאים איתנו בעימות חזיתי שהוא עשוי להתפתח לממדים שהם גם עלולים להיות עם השלכות כבדות ביותר, גם בים התיכון, גם בחזית הסורית עם ג'ולני שהוא פרוקסי של הטורקים, זה אירוע שהוא מאוד מאוד לא טוב מבחינתנו, מבחינת ישראל, ומחייב אותנו להעמיק את הבריתות שלנו מול יוון וקפריסין, איחוד האמירויות, סומלילנד, הודו, זאת המציאות, האתגרים הבאים, מה שנקרא, של העשור הבא.
כאן ומאיתנו, בוא נעשה פה סדר, איך אתה רואה את זה?
And that was subtitled, so hopefully you could read along as you heard, but don't worry too much. If you didn't catch that there for on the live stream, we will be putting that in the dispatch tomorrow with the translation presented as well. But essentially, that was the Israeli Diaspora Affairs Minister saying this Middle East and NATO is a very, very, very dangerous thing for us. It's very bad, and we're going to now need to counter it with our own alliances. And as you heard at the top of this section, when we read the Israel Hayom blog, those alliances will include the UAE, India, and they mentioned Somaliland as well. Now, that really doesn't come anywhere near the strength of Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia combined, especially when you consider the nuclear weight added by Pakistan. Somaliland is not even recognized by anyone outside of Israel. And of course, India, though it is, of course, its own nuclear power, India, because of Modi and the BJP, is finding itself increasingly isolated on the world stage as well, because it's currently ruled and governed by yet another ideologue, and that is the Hindu supremacist leading the BJP, Narendra Modi. And if you notice, the troublemaking countries that are opposed to the stabilizing forces in the region are all the ideological countries. It used to be the Soviet Union. Now, who are they? Well, it's the Shia Islamists in the Iranian theocracy. That's an ideological country. It's the Hindu supremacists under Modi in India. It's the Likud Zionists. Surprise, surprise, when you turn dogma and ideology into a ruling principle, it causes problems and war and conflict in your surrounding area. Why? Because, of course, what it leads to is supremacism. And supremacism, by its very nature, leads to conflict. Whether that be Hindu supremacism, Modi's Hindu supremacism in India, Shia Islamist supremacism, such as the Iranian theocracies, or any other form of supremacism, such as Jewish supremacism that the Likud Zionists hold on to as well. And so the Israelis are going to be isolated, even though they're opposing this. Here's one more example. This is Israel's agricultural minister, Avi Dichter. He's also saying this is very, very problematic for Israel, that they oppose this Middle East and NATO as well. Let's just blow this up on your screens so you can take a listen to this one as well.
מאז מלחמת העולם השנייה. עכשיו נרקמת ברית חדשה, שאני לא יודע לומר שהיא נגד ישראל, אבל היא בוודאי ברית מסובכת לנו. פקיסטן, סעודיה, טורקיה, זו ברית סונית מאוד מאוד בעייתית למדינת ישראל. מצרים ככל הנראה תצטרף לברית הזו, וזה כיוון אחר. היה ציר איראן, עיראק, סוריה, לבנון, שגדענו אותו, וסוריה ולבנון יצאו מהמשחק הזה, ועכשיו יש לנו ברית אחרת. זה מחייב אותנו להיות מאוד מאוד זהירים. פקיסטן היא מדינה עם נשק גרעיני, ואנחנו צריכים בנושא הזה לעמוד במשמר. זה רק מחזק את הצורך בברית עם מעצמה עולמית בסדר גודל כמו ארצות הברית.
Now, again, that was subtitled, but don't worry, we'll publish the translation for that tomorrow. But it's enough to say that pretty much all Israeli factions are opposed to this deal. In fact, only today, as is on your screens now, the Israeli Foreign Ministry, via their socials, put out the following tweet with a map attached to it as well, singling out Turkey and blaming Turkey for being the aggressor in all of this. So we've blown that up on your screens. Just going to read it. So this is from today by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. It says, Turkey has the audacity to criticize Israel. But what are the facts on the ground? Thousands of Turkish soldiers, dozens of military bases and outposts across Syria, Iraq, and Cyprus. While Erdogan's military aggression knows no borders, and Turkey occupies 36% of Cyprus, 5% of Syria, and 2,000 kilometers of Iraq. Israel temporarily controls a mere 0.1% of Syria, a buffer zone to protect its citizens from proven security threats. And then they posted that map that you should be able to see now. The Turkey, of course, in light red or pink. And then its territories that it's controlling right now in dark red. 36% of Cyprus, you can see there in dark red on the island of Cyprus, and chunks in Syria and Iraq. Now, this is a somewhat surreal and absurd post by the Israeli Foreign Ministry to put out, not least because, unlike the West Bank and Gaza, there is no ongoing conflict in Cyprus. Cyprus is and has been stable for since World War II, and it's split in half, with effectively 36% of it controlled by Turkey, and the rest of it, the majority, the largest chunk of it, controlled by Greece. And Greece and Turkey are not at war with each other, both members of NATO, and there is no ongoing or hot conflict on the island of Cyprus. Unlike Gaza and the West Bank, there is no two-state solution there, whereas in Cyprus, there is a two-state solution. Clearly on the Israelis' own map they posted there, there's the Greek section and the Turkish section. That's two states. It's divided into two. That isn't what's happened in the Palestinian territories. And in addition, the Israeli Foreign Ministry's reference to Turkey occupying parts of Syria and Iraq. Well, you know, we're all old enough to remember why the Turks had to go into Syria and Iraq. And that is because of the war that the neocons, with Israeli backing, started on Iraq, completely unrelated to 9/11, though they went in after 9/11. Al-Qaeda did not exist in Iraq before the war on Iraq. And of course, it then did exist once the neocons invaded Iraq. And that country became so destabilized, as did Syria, that ISIS emerged, and they are neighboring Turkey. Turkey had to go in to stabilize the region. The new regime in Syria under Prime Minister Ahmed al-Shara is allied with Turkey and has no issue with Turkish cooperation. This Israeli Foreign Ministry post is rather absurd. But nevertheless, they posted it today. We thought we'd bring it to you. That's the final example we're showing you as to why even the Israelis oppose this deal. But the deal is going to stand. In fact, Egypt may be next to join. And that is something that the Pakistani defense minister himself has encouraged to happen. This clip is in Urdu, but suffice to say, you can see again, the subtitles will be at the bottom. But the defense minister of Pakistan has said that he encourages the expansion of this Middle Eastern NATO to, in fact, become exactly what Israel is pejoratively calling it, a Muslim NATO. He wants other Muslim majority countries to join in. Of course, the Middle East is primarily Muslim majority countries, so fair enough. His idea is to get all of them in there and stabilize the Middle East as much as possible, with Egypt being touted as the next country to join. Take a listen to this.
देखें, ये इसमें मेरा ख्याल है कोई दरवाजे बाकी ममालिक के लिए बंद नहीं किए जा सकते. ये एक्सक्लूसिव क्लब जो है, मैं दिस इज माय पर्सनल ओपिनियन, इसको एक्सपैंड होना चाहिए. मेरा ख्याल है कि नेटो की तर्ज के ऊपर जो है मुस्लिम ममालिक को अपने मुनाफात जो है वो साइड पे रख के जो ट्रांजैक्शनल जो बातें हैं या जो बायलैटरल आपस में डिस्प्यूट्स हैं वो साइड पे रख के अगर ये एक उस पे खड़े हो जाए. देखें ना अभी ये जो बयान किस तरीके से मुआहदा.
So that is the Pakistani defense minister. We won't try and bring you translations of that. We'll provide that in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch. But essentially, just so you know, what he said there was it should be expanded. It should be expanded to include Egypt, and then he called it a Muslim NATO. And we'll conclude by reading what Egypt's Intel Observer posted online. Turkey's foreign minister said yesterday that Ankara expect Egypt to join the newly signed Mecca Joint Defense Pact with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan once the remaining technical issues are resolved. He described Egypt as a natural partner in the emerging alliance and said that he expects Cairo to eventually sign on. Egypt had already taken part in earlier political and security consultations that helped pave the way for the agreement. And of course, there, Egypt's flag is added. That is the future of this pact. Egypt will probably be a member of it. As to why so far Egypt isn't a member, and this is the last thing we'll bring for you in today's stream. We've already gone over an hour, 20 minutes. And that is, as Middle Eastern Eye reports, Egypt declined to join the Turkey, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia Defense Pact, primarily due to its sensitive relationship with Israel, a source in Ankara told the Middle East Eye. Just to read a paragraph for you from that. In February, former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett accused Turkey of trying to flip Saudi Arabia against us. You just saw the video. And establish a hostile Sunni axis with nuclear Pakistan. Expressing frustration with the matter, a Turkish official told the Middle East Eye earlier this year, "We are trying to keep the Egyptians and the Saudis on this platform while the Israelis are constantly trying to bully them." Now in bold. As a US ally, a neighbor of Israel, and an Arab country with full diplomatic relations with Tel Aviv, Egypt must carefully manage its complex engagement with the Israeli government. Egypt has a defense treaty with Abu Dhabi and deployed Rafale fighter jets in response to Iranian strikes against the UAE in May. According to the second source, this predicament has also led Saudi Arabia to view Egypt as somewhat unreliable. The source added that Egypt does not want to choose sides between emerging blocs comprising Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan on one side, and Israel, the UAE, and India on the other. So that is a fair summary of the situation for you. Egypt is still touted to join, but finds itself caught in the middle of this new two blocs that have emerged. Of course, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey on the one end, and on the other side, Israel, the UAE, and India, with Somaliland added in there. But It does look, though, to be the case that the new Middle East NATO, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey will end up winning this struggle with Iran and with Israel. They'll end up stabilizing the Middle East, and crucially, they'll end up providing stability in the Middle East, by the Middle East, and for the Middle East. And this brings us back to the last point here of the theme. What we've been saying for a long time on Radical Media, that the world will end up being divided into spheres of influence. And of course, under Trump, the American sphere will be the North and South Americas, and China will end up having its own sphere on the other side of the Pacific. But the Middle East will end up gaining its own sphere of influence as well, and will end up standing on its own 2 feet with its own military reliance and its own economy to support it. We will not end up in World War III. Rather, we're going to end up in a mutually agreed to division of the world into these spheres of influence, as we've described. Of course, that leaves Europe, and one wonders which way Europe's going to go. Well, the jury's open. Does it come under a Russian sphere of influence? Does it end up managing its own affairs, getting on its own feet? Does it come under UK influence? And of course, the future of the UK is also in question post-Brexit. Which sphere of influence does the UK join? But by and large, the world will end up settling for a spheres of influence approach, and that's how we avoid what's known as the Thucydides trap, or the danger of World War III as China ascends and American power stabilizes in the world. That's all we got time for this week's Warrior Creed. As always, go to majidnawaz.substack.com. The weekly Radical Dispatch, the written version of this stream, will be provided there for free for all free subscribers. And our premium subscribers will get the podcast version of this stream and all our paywall content. We encourage you all to join and become premium subscribers. Without your support, we cannot do this work. And until next time, you've been listening to the Radical Majid Nawaz for the Warrior Creed live stream. Thank you very much.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.